Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's Beasley Allen webinar. Our webinar today is Benzene in Sunscreen and Deodorant Products. My name is David Byrne, and it's my pleasure to speak to you today about this important litigation topic. During our time today, we're going to explore the history and impact of benzene-contaminated sunscreens, deodorants, and I'm going to do my very best to give you an overview of the litigation that followed last year's very public disclosure of this benzene and consumer product problem. While we're waiting on the last of our registrants to join us, this probably is a good time for us to go over a few housekeeping notes. First and foremost, this is a 1-hour CLE presentation, and we hope to have your 1-hour credit posted by the end of this week. All of our attendees will receive an email tomorrow that will include an evaluation form, a copy of today's presentation, and a link to today's video. Next, very important, I want to encourage all of you who are watching today to go ahead and register for our webinar next month on Meta or Facebook litigation. Meta litigation is one of the most exciting things we have going right now. It is a litigation area that is truly taken off. Our next webinar is scheduled for Wednesday, July 20th. That is a don't miss presentation. So be sure to check Beasley Allen's event page for registration details. Last but not least, if you have questions during today's webinar, and we really encourage questions, submit them to me through the chat box feature on your screen. I'll do my best to answer all of them at the end of today's presentation. Of course, if you don't feel comfortable posting your questions to the chat box, you are more than welcome to email them to me this afternoon. You can email them to me tomorrow at the address listed on the cover slide, which all of you should see right now, david.byrne@beasleyallen.com. So with that, let's go ahead and get started with today's program. Over the past year, we've learned that many of the most popular sunscreen and deodorant products sold in the United States and around the world contained high levels of benzene. A lot of you are familiar with that chemical, but just to give you a brief rundown, benzene is a colorless or sometimes light yellow liquid chemical that's used in a number of different industries. It's a member of a class of compounds known as hydrocarbons. And even in trace amounts, exposure to benzene can have a really detrimental effect on the human body. Once it enters the bloodstream, benzene causes chromosome changes in bone marrow cells, and that impairs the body's ability to produce healthy levels of white blood cells, red blood cells, and blood platelets, all of which produces anemia. As many of you know, the International Agency for Research on Cancer, or IARC, is an organization tied to the World Health Organization. And one of its key missions, if not its most important mission, is to identify causes of cancer. At present, IARC classifies benzene as carcinogenic to humans. That's not a very, fancy sounding moniker, but it is the highest cancer classification that IARC hands out. And that designation is based on mountains of scientific and medical evidence that benzene causes, I want to repeat that, causes acute myeloid leukemia, or AML. In addition, IARC has found repeatedly that exposure to benzene is linked to several other subtypes of blood cancer, including acute lymphocytic leukemia, or ALL, chronic lymphocytic leukemia, CLL, multiple myeloma, and non-Hodgkin lymphoma. What about the EPA? Well, the Environmental Protection Agency, much like the American Cancer Society, It's reached similar conclusions. Both organizations classify benzene currently as a known human carcinogen. What about the FDA? Well, the FDA, as some of you probably know, it actually regulates sunscreens as deodorants as both cosmetics and drugs. The FDA lists benzene as a class 1 solvent. And this is an important feature of the FDA's oversight of benzene in cosmetic and drug products. Currently, the FDA says that benzene should not be employed in the manufacture of drug substances, excipients, and drug products because of their unacceptable toxicity. However, if their use is unavoidable in order to produce a drug product with a significant therapeutic advance, then their levels should be restricted. And that restriction is 2 parts per million under those special circumstances. Now, as we're going to talk about in just a bit, that FDA 2 parts per million conditional limit is a big deal. And it plays a very big role in these sunscreen and deodorant cases. Why? Well, because the use and presence of benzene in sunscreen and deodorant products is completely avoidable. And what's more, benzene doesn't provide a therapeutic advance of any kind for sunscreen and deodorant products. And we know that because of the sheer number of sunscreens and deodorants that are out there on the market today that don't contain a trace of benzene in them. And those sunscreens do a perfectly good job of protecting us from the sun and its UV rays. And those deodorants do a perfectly good job of keeping sweat and body odor at bay without any benzene at all. So, this 2 parts per million FDA conditional limit that we're going to talk about, we sort of use that as a bit of a floor in these cases, but the reality is there's no reason under the sun for there to be any benzene in these consumer products, none whatsoever. So benzene, where do we usually find it? Some of you who have an environmental practice or who have a background in occupational safety or a background in the chemical industry, you know that benzene is certainly formed through natural processes, through volcanoes, forest fires, things of that nature. But most exposure to benzene results from human activity. Benzene is among the 20 most widely used industrial chemicals in the US, and NIOSH recommends protective equipment be worn by workers expecting to be exposed to benzene at concentrations as low as 0.1 part per million, 0.1 part per million. Benzene is used in the production of plastics, lubricants, rubbers, dyes, detergents, drugs, and pesticide. And of course, benzene is also a natural part of crude oil and gasoline. And therefore, we do encounter benzene in motor vehicle exhaust as well as cigarette smoke. The main way that people are exposed to benzene is by breathing in air that contains benzene. But benzene can also be absorbed readily through the skin during contact with a source, such as gasoline or other solvents. People can absorb benzene if they bathe or shower in contaminated water. But one exposure source that the average person would absolutely not expect would be through a consumer product like a UV protective sunscreen or a daily use deodorant spray. And of course, thanks to the work of an organization called ValSure, we now know better. So who is ValSure? ValSure is an independent Connecticut-based lab that was founded back in 2015. And since that time, ValSure has had a string of really stunning successes uncovering serious safety problems in common consumer products and medications. The first big breakthrough for ValSure came in 2019 when it found a cancer-causing substance in the blood pressure drug valsartan. Some of you may recall that revelation. Later that same year, 2019, ValSure detected a different carcinogen known as NDMA in the heartburn drug Zantac. And many of you already know that finding led to sweeping recalls of that medication and ultimately the April 2020 withdrawal of all such products using that same active ingredient. Then in 2021, ValSure revealed to the public that it had initiated a testing program that uncovered high levels of benzene in a number of aerosol sunscreen and deodorant sprays. And if everybody will let me editorialize just a bit, break away from the talk just a bit, let me say, I really believe that independent testing like ValSure's, that's a critical part of the drug and product safety system, because those organizations, they do a lot for us. They catch problems that the FDA, with its limited budget, its limited resources, its limited number of people, just seem to miss. I have to tell you, there has been a little bit of tension between the FDA and ValSure over the years, and that's understandable because ValSure, in effect, has come in time after time and uncovered really important safety information that honestly the FDA itself should have been on top of. But hats off to ValSure for all that they do. So let's take a moment and let's review the ValSure Sunscreen Lab Results. So on May 24, 2021, ValSure announced the detection of high levels of benzene in several brands and batches of sunscreen, all of which are considered by the FDA to be drug products. ValSure also detected benzene in several after sun care products. After sun care products are distinguished from sunscreens, of course. These are aloe vera gels. These are cooling lotions that people apply after they've been in the sun for an extended period of time. And those after sun care products, those are regulated by the FDA as cosmetics. But anyway, I digress. So nearly 300 sprays and lotions were tested by ValSure as part of this program, and 78, or roughly 27%, tested positive for benzene. Some batches contain levels, in fact, that were up to 3 times that FDA 2 part per million conditional limit that we spoke about earlier. All total, 14 sun care product lots were found to contain benzene concentrations of 2 parts per million or more, including very popular brands like Neutrogena, Aveeno, Sunbum, CVS Health, and Fruit of the Earth. Following the ValSure citizens petition, and that's how they rolled this information out. I mean, ValSure put together a very well-written, a very thorough citizens petition that it filed with the FDA. And immediately after that hit, Johnson & Johnson conducted an internal investigation of its Neutrogena and Aveeno sunscreen lines. Johnson & Johnson is the parent company of those 2 product lines. And J&J ultimately elected, with the urging of the FDA, mind you, to recall the following Neutrogena and Aveeno sunscreen products in July of last year. So you can see it on the slide. They recalled the Neutrogena Beach Defense Aerosol Spray, the Neutrogena Cool Dry Sport product, Neutrogena Invisible Daily Defense, Neutrogena Ultra Sheer Aerosol, and last but not least, the Aveeno Protect and Refresh Aerosol Sunscreen. Now, what do all of those product lines have in common? They're all aerosol. They're all aerosol sprays. By and large, lotion, while there was benzene detected in some sunscreen products, by and large, the problem lay with aerosols. And we'll touch on why that seems to be in just a bit. I don't have this up on the slide, but it's worth noting that in addition to the Johnson & Johnson recall, a company known as Beiersdorf, it's the owner of Coppertone, and Beiersdorf decided in September of last year, so several months after the J&J recall, that it too would do a limited recall of the following products. And I'll read them to you since I don't have them up on my screen or up on the slide, and I apologize for that. So the Coppertone recall involved Coppertone Pure and Simple SPF 50, Coppertone Pure and Simple Kids SPF 50, Coppertone Pure and Simple Baby SPF 50, and then last but not least, Coppertone Sport Mineral SPF and travel size Coppertone Sport Spray. Again, all aerosol products. And what's interesting about the Coppertone recall is these were all SPF 50 product lines. I'm not 100% sure what's going on there, except for the fact that the raw materials and active ingredients in those SPF 50 line of products are somewhat different, I believe, than those you would find, say, in SPF 30 or SPF 15. Okay, so let's fast forward then to November 4, 2021, and ValSure strikes again. ValSure releases another stunning announcement, another citizen's petition, which advised the FDA that more than half of the 108 batches of deodorants and body spray products the company tested from among 30 different brands of deodorants contained benzene. Several of the aerosol products tested had levels of benzene well above the 2 part per million limit the FDA advises manufacturers not to exceed, at least in consumer drugs or products. The most highly contaminated products included 2 very popular Procter & Gamble brands, Old Spice and Secret Sprays. 2 lots of Old Spice Pure Sport, in fact, contained an average benzene concentration of, hold on to your hat, 17 parts per million, nearly 9 times the FDA limit. Procter & Gamble's Secret Powder Fresh 24-hour aerosol spray contained an average concentration of 16 parts per million. So you're talking about really benzene levels in those sprays that in many cases dwarf those found even in the sunscreens. And what's even more frightening about the discoveries, the benzene discoveries in these deodorant sprays is common sense would tell us that people apply their spray-on deodorants every single day, at least once a day, sometimes more. It's applied in the same location. It's applied in the same basic amounts, and people tend to stick to the same product day in and day out. Not a lot of jumping back and forth among products like one would expect sometimes with sunscreen, where you just grab whatever's in the beach bag or you grab whatever's laying around in the pool. So here's a quick breakdown on the products that were implicated in the ValSure deodorant citizens petition. In total, 24 lots of body spray products from 8 different brands contained between 2.24 and, I'm trying to do this from memory, 17.7 parts per million of benzene. 14 lots from among 8 brands contained detectable benzene between, again, searching my memory, I believe it was around 0.20 to 1.89 parts per million. And finally, 21 lots from 8 brands contained detectable benzene at less than 0.1 part per million. Really, we would classify those as non-detects. Benzene, though, was officially not detected at all in any quantity in 49 lots of body sprays from 19 different brands through initial analysis of at least one sample from those lots. And again, that's a very important point. It ties into what we talked about earlier. It's absolutely possible to produce very good deodorant spray, very good antiperspirant sprays that don't have any benzene in them at all. Benzene is not a necessary ingredient or component of any of these products. There's just no good reason for it to be in these products in any amount whatsoever. So just as we saw with sunscreens, we have deodorant recalls, and I've listed most of the deodorant recalls up there on this slide. I do expect we'll see more in the coming months, but very soon after the ValSure report hit in November 2021, Procter & Gamble recalled a number of its Old Spice and Secret sprays that you have listed here. You've got the Old Spice High Endurance Spray, Hardest Working Spray, which covers 4 or 5 different specific scents. Swagger's, Pure Sport, Stronger Swagger, and Ultimate Captain. Anyway, interesting names, but all of them chock full of benzene. Old Spice Below Deck, Old Spice Pure Sport, Secret Aerosol Powder Fresh, Secret Fresh Collection Spray in 5 different scents, and the Secret Outlast Invigorating Spray, both completely clean and protecting powder. Fast forward a few more months, and on February 16 of this year, TCP Hot Acquisitions, which does business as HRB Brands, recalled several of the Brute and Sure aerosol lines, including Brute Classic Antiperspirant, Brute Classic Deodorant, Sure Regular Antiperspirant, and Sure Unscented Antiperspirant. Then in March of this year, Unilever, the maker of Suave, recalled 2 Suave products, Suave 24-Hour Protection Aerosol Antiperspirant Powder, and the 24-Hour Protection Aerosol in the Fresh scent. So what's the cause? How exactly did benzene manage to make its way into all of these sunscreen and deodorant products? Many petroleum products are used as raw materials or inactive ingredients in consumer healthcare products. In particular, with aerosol sunscreens and body sprays, we have these propellants like butane, isobutane, propane, and alcohol. Those are all commonly used, and they're all potential sources of benzene contamination. In the case of Johnson & Johnson, we learned through class discovery that we took that the recalled Neutrogena and Aveeno products were produced by 2 outside manufacturers. Not sure if I could name their names, but I'm going to go ahead and do it anyway. It's Voyant Elkhart, which is still a current manufacturer of Neutrogena products for J&J, and Forever Richmond, which is a former manufacturer, outside sunscreen manufacturer for J&J. And both of these outside manufacturers used a common ingredient in the sprays that were recalled. It's isobutane. Isobutane is a raw material that was supplied to J&J's outside manufacturers by two suppliers. And that's AeroPress Corporation and Diversified CPC International. After Johnson & Johnson completed a root cause analysis and conducted a testing program of finished product lots, J&J came to the conclusion that it was contaminated isobutane feedstock that was causing the problem. And we took depositions and discovery of those who headed up the root cause analysis. And I do feel fairly confident that at least for the sunscreen products that J&J pulled off the market, isobutane does appear to be the culprit here. I'm confident that Procter & Gamble has conducted, or at least claims to have conducted, a similar root cause analysis, but it's not clear at this point, at least not to me, whether their benzene contamination problems can be traced to a single raw material source like we find with the J&J situation. What we do know is that ValSure took an extra step in its investigation of the deodorant and antiperspirant sprays. It actually evaluated the listed inactive ingredients in the 108 body spray products that it tested. And what it found was a prevalence of contamination in 5 major propellant ingredients. The first propellant ingredient was hydrofluorocarbon 152A. That is a raw material that's used in 95 of the products that it tested, of which, of that product group, 54% had benzene. Butane was another raw material they tested. It's used as an active or an inactive ingredient in 77 of the products that ValSure tested. And of that number, 69% of those products were found to contain benzene. Isobutane, the J&J culprit, well, in the deodorant research, ValSure found that it was used in 74 of the tested products, of which 58% of those contained benzene. Propane, it shows up in 60 of the product lines tested by ValSure, and of that number, 52% included benzene. And then finally, alcohol. Alcohol is a raw material or ingredient in 47 of the tested deodorant products, and of that number, 36% included benzene. So, I have not participated in any P&G discovery, and I'm not 100% sure that any has commenced yet. I suspect that there will be some confirmatory discovery, as we'll see in a minute, as part of a class settlement proposal. But unfortunately, this time I'm not sure exactly where they are in any sort of confirmatory discovery. So the next slide I've posted speaks to sort of this unique combination of airborne and dermal exposures that we see with both the sunscreen and deodorant cases. And for those of you who have an environmental background, you know that we refer to these things as exposure pathways. And these aerosol sunscreens and deodorants present two very distinct pathways of exposure. First, we have the obvious airborne exposure that comes through the release of these aerosols into the atmosphere, a lot of which make contact with the skin, but some of which can be inhaled by the user. Now, how much evaporates in the air and thus is not available for dermal exposure? That's going to depend largely on the constituents, the temperature, humidity, and so these are just things that will need to be modeled. to the extent they haven't been already. Dermal absorption, whatever benzene is not evaporated before making contact with the skin or clothes will be available for exposure. Even this reduced amount may result in very significant exposures, as the slide suggests. So let's take a moment and let's look at the state of litigation that we have out there right now. So shortly after the ValSure citizens petition on sunscreens was disclosed, a wave of class action cases were filed against J&J in federal courts throughout the country. Among other things, the cases asserted warranty claims, fraud claims, advertising claims, and Consumer Protection Act claims. On October 8, 2021, the JPML consolidated and transferred all of the class action cases against J&J to U.S. District Judge Raj Singhal in the Southern District of Florida. He has done an excellent job of managing that litigation. I can report that to you firsthand. But by December of 2021, the parties in several of the consolidated class cases, including our Beasley Allen cases, we got together and after working things through with J&J, we filed a motion for preliminary approval of a class settlement. That proposed class settlement was preliminarily approved by Judge Singhal on March 28, 2022. And he accepted that, at least preliminarily, as a full and complete consolidation of all the class litigation involved in MDL 3015. At this point, final approval is set for hearing on August 12th of this year. And in this time period between preliminary approval and this final approval process, we have been actively taking confirmatory discovery to ensure that the terms of the settlement agreement, particularly the injunctive relief terms, are being complied with, and to ensure that we do in fact have a handle on what went on, how this all came about, and that we have a handle on exactly what Johnson & Johnson knew and when they knew it. Not 100% sure we have that last part down exactly. We're still pushing for some of the what J&J knew and when they knew it information, but we're going to keep at it. So let's talk about the MDL 3015 class settlement terms. Under the terms of the settlement, class members will receive, or they're eligible to receive, a full refund for all aerosol sunscreen sunscreen products that they purchased that were subject to JJCI's voluntary recall. Class members are also eligible for a voucher equal to the average retail selling price of certain non-aerosol or lotion products, which may be used towards the purchase of any Neutrogena or Vino products. And that, that difference boils down to the fact that it's the aerosol sunscreens in the Neutrogena and Aveeno lines that were the primary problem. The lotions, by and large, just weren't that much of an issue at all. So that's why we have this distinction between full refunds for recalled aerosol sprays and vouchers for certain lotion products. In addition to that direct monetary relief, the class settlement also includes some really significant injunctive relief provisions. Those provisions require JJCI, or Johnson & Johnson Consumer, to direct its external manufacturer, and I've mentioned them before, that's Forever Richmond, to first and foremost purge any existing inventory of isobutane intended for use in its sunscreen products. I can confirm for you that has been done. Second, JJCI is required to direct its external sunscreen manufacturers to adopt a host of new testing protocols that require any supplier of isobutane raw material to test for the presence of benzene at no more than 1 part per million and refrain from shipping such raw materials unless the shipment has passed such test. Now, I'll tell you that those raw material suppliers, just to give you a bit of background, they have always been under an obligation to submit with their isobutane feedstock USP 467 forms. These are forms, or this is a USP 467 requires very strict residual solvent limits in these raw materials, and they are required to attest to the lack of these residual solvents in the ingredients they pass along to the consumer. The problem is that the two raw material suppliers of isobutane, they were certifying in the testing that, hey, our feedstock is USP 467 compliant. They just weren't explaining how they came to that conclusion. And what's become clear through confirmatory discovery is they didn't reach that conclusion by means of testing. They weren't doing any testing that we know of. They were just simply signing off and saying, to the best of our knowledge, no residual solvents like benzene in our isobutane propellant. So the new testing protocols that come with this settlement are in my mind very significant. Last but not least, the actual finished product manufacturer for JJCI is required to engage an ISO certified lab to test random samples from at least 25% of the manufacturing lots of finished sunscreen products, and they're to test it for the presence of benzene, and they are to withhold the release of such products unless all of the samples have passed the test. So you fail one test, the entire batch gets thrown out. You have to bat 1,000 under this program, and I'm happy to report that at least according to the testimony that we've obtained thus far, JJCI has complied with that provision as well. So let's turn now to one of the other active MDLs that spun out of the ValSure revelations, and that's the Procter & Gamble Aerosol Products litigation, which is tagged as MDL 3025. Procter & Gamble is obviously a competitor of J&J, and it is facing a number of consumer class actions that assert various tort and warranty claims. The actions allege that Procter & Gamble misled consumers on the alleged presence of benzene in Procter & Gamble's now recalled Secret and Old Spice antiperspirant and deodorant spray products, as well as its Pantene, Herbal Essence, Aussie, Old Spice, Waterless, and hair food aerosol dry conditioners and dry shampoos. I forgot to mention earlier that dry conditioners and dry shampoos, those were found to be problematic as well. So in April of this year, all of those class cases were consolidated before Judge Michael Watson in the U.S. District Court for the Southern District of Ohio. And earlier this month, earlier last month, the parties in MDL 3025 announced to the court that they had reached an agreement in principle to settle all of the complaints in the MDL. Now, my expectation is that a lot of filings are going to occur before the end of this month. And although I'm not 100% sure about all of the details of the settlement, and all of the details have not been made public yet, from the attorneys I've spoken with who are heavily involved in MDL 3025, I expect the settlement with Procter & Gamble to closely resemble this recent settlement that our firm has been involved in with Johnson & Johnson over the sunscreen sprays. Oh, pardon me. All right, so turning our attention away from the class litigation and focusing for just a minute on potential personal injury claims, I know many of you are eager to get some insight into what we at least consider to be really good personal injury factors here. And I should tell you, before I completely leave the two MDL proceedings that I mentioned a moment ago, as of yet, the Judicial Panel on Multi-District Litigation has not pitched personal injury claims into the MDL bucket. Now, that may change over time as we see more sunscreen and deodorant personal injury claims filed. The JPML may revisit that decision and decide, yes, we're going to go ahead and consolidate all personal injury claims in the MDL as well. But as of yet, that has not happened. So, you know, in terms of personal injury criteria, right now, our firm at least is focused on acute myeloid leukemia cases, ALL cases, and CML cases. We've really looked at the myeloid cases. We've looked at the non-Hodgkin's cases, and frankly, not saying there aren't some really good studies. There's certainly some literature out there that links benzene exposure to non-Hodgkin's, multiple myeloma, that sort of thing. But we just at this stage don't feel confident enough in those claims to press ahead with them. And frankly, you know, the number one case is obviously AML. I mean, AML is so strongly linked, causally linked to benzene exposure that those really are the top tier cases. At least with our firm, we require consistent use for at least a year or more prior to diagnosis. Diagnosis needs to be, you know, greater than 1 year after start of use. And we're really screening heavily for industrial or unusual environmental exposures. And you know, there's just no getting around it. Benzene crops up in a lot of different ways in a lot of different places. Depending on someone's work history, depending on, you know, environmental exposures in around their home or workplace, really look closely at that. Last but not least, we're just taking a hard look at cases, even AML cases, where the potential client had some regular smoking history. Smoking is an absolute benzene delivery mechanism, no doubt about it. If you're a smoker, you are getting a pretty big dose of benzene every time you light up. One thing that's not included on this criteria list that I want to touch on, because it is important, the big unknown to us at this stage, and it's an unknown that we're working through with testing, through discovery, and through the work of experts, is the length of time this sunscreen and deodorant contamination problem's been going on. You know, during the Johnson & Johnson root cause investigation, the company, and I think they did this intentionally, but they limited their finished product testing to batches of sunscreen that were still within their expiration dates. And it justified that by claiming that, well, as we worked through those finished product samples that were still within expiration, we were seeing a really significant drop-off in benzene levels in the third and fourth quarter of 2019, which, if that's true, I mean, if in fact this is a problem that only cropped up in the second half of 2019, then we're talking about a very limited period of exposure for most of our plaintiffs. So that's an issue that we've got to get to the bottom of. Same for the Procter and Gamble deodorant cases. We really need to get a handle on that, and one way to do that is through testing, of course, and then just through more and more discovery. So anyway, that brings us to the end of my prepared presentation, and I will open the floor now to any questions. I'm checking my chat box to see if any questions have come in so far. And none have shown up. Let me give you a few minutes. If you want to type up a chat question, feel free. We'll take a few minutes for you to do that. Again, I want to remind you, if you have a question that you don't want to submit in this setting, by all means, feel free to email me. I'll take us back to the first slide, so you've got my email address. It's david.byrne@beasleyallen.com. By all means, feel free to send me any kind of question. All right, we do have a question. This is from William, and William asks, has benzene been tied to skin cancers? That's an excellent question. And the answer is there's really not a solid link between melanomas, other type of skin cancers or lesions, and benzene exposure, at least not chronic exposure. It's true that if one were to be in an industrial accident, and to have a really large amount of benzene or some solvent containing benzene poured onto their skin, yeah, you could probably envision having all sorts of problems, to include some skin cancers. But right now, skin cancer does not appear to be something that we or anybody should really be focused on for this effort. So, but thank you, William, for presenting that. Any other questions? If not, again, feel free to email me later in the day. Email me tomorrow. Again, you'll be receiving, you should receive an email tomorrow from our firm that will include your evaluation form, which I hope you'll fill out, a copy of today's presentation, a link to the video. And once again, I want to put in a plug for our Wednesday, July 20th webinar on Meta or Facebook litigation. Folks, again, that is a really, really hot topic right now. It is a webinar that I'm certainly going to tune into and watch. And all of the registration details you can acquire simply by going onto the Beasley Allen event webpage, get the details, go ahead and register. And I want to thank each and every one of you for your time and attendance today. If there are no further questions, then I'm going to go ahead and sign off. Thank you so much for joining us today. Have a great rest of your week.